Everybody ordered like
something.
Sorry.
We caught them all talking in the channel.
Oh.
Wait, is Paul? Is that
Surprise!
Hey, Paul.
I'm back.
Welcome back.
Welcome
Oh, it's
back.
good to be
Mike's.
back.
I'm going into the cone of silence.
Into the cone of silence she goes. Well, it's good to be back. You got the stream going, Rick? He's got the stream going. I guess we're on the YouTube. We're on the Discord. I'm back from 3 weeks of vacation. Jonathan Peugeot was in for 1 week, and that went well. I tried to get John Van Donk in and Joe, but John Van Donk didn't feel ready. I have no idea what that means. And then Paul Anleitner was going to come in for 1 week, but the night before he contacted Rick and said he had lost his voice because he had strep throat. So sorry for the pause. I'm not going to be here next week either, but after that, once school starts for my wife, we'll be back in the saddle week after week. So it's kind of the way summer goes. So it's great to be back. I put out a video this week. I wrote out a script this morning for probably a video for Monday, which I think people will find interesting, connecting Mark Driscoll and Jordan Peterson and history of the magazine Christianity Today, American culture, American Protestantism, world culture, Rod Dreher, lots of stuff in that video is coming. So hopefully today I'll get a chance to make that after I do my rough draft. There'll be a rough draft coming Saturday for my Sunday sermon. So getting back into the swing of things. So it's good to be back. Got in this morning and Rick was setting everything up, and I've just had a busy week dealing with lots of homeless things and church things. And whenever you come back from vacation after a long vacation, there's always a ton of stuff that's sort of fallen apart when you've been gone, and you have to sort of set things up right again. And off we go. So first question that I'll spend an hour on, I don't think so, was a question I actually missed last time from July 23. Change nickname, live feed. There we go. T.S. Apostolos asked the question, what's your flow state? Can you tell us a story? Of course, I did a lot of living before I ever heard this term flow state. And I noticed a variety of things in myself. I was always sort of a person who could sit down with a book and tune out the rest of the world. And that's kind of a flow state. Sermon writing for me is very much a flow state. Like this week, I usually make my first PowerPoint draft of the sermon. I usually do my exegetical work Tuesday and Wednesday. I try not to do too much exegetical work on Monday generally because you still have the sermon hangover. So Tuesday, Wednesday, you start digging around in the text and thinking about the series that you've been working and the narrative that you're working. And then Thursday is my day to sit down and write a PowerPoint of the sermon I'm going to do. And I usually like to do that first thing when I get up in the morning. I usually don't do it at the office because people bang on my door and come find me at the office. So I usually do it at home. I just get in the quiet corner at home with my computer and just get into a flow state. And if I can get into a flow state, I can write my sermon in, a couple of hours, probably, at least a decent solid draft of it. And then I'll continue to work on it. Friday, I'll do a rough draft here. I'll usually edit the PowerPoint before I do the rough draft video. Then I'll do the rough draft video. And then after I'm done with the rough draft video, Anne Lamont is a writer who, she has a book about writing, and her book about writing, I forget the title of it right now, but a big part of that book, I read this book years ago. She talked about shitty first drafts. And that's kind of how I feel about my rough draft for Sunday. After I record the video, it's like, oh, that was horrible. I don't know if I can live with myself if I have to preach that on Sunday. So then I'll continue to mull it over Friday evening and all day Saturday. Saturday is usually sort of my day off. And then, although taking a day off is always difficult. You really need to sort of have a Jewish law to take a day off. And so then Sunday morning, I'll get up early and I'll get back into that sermon and I'll change some things in the PowerPoint. And then Sunday morning, 11 o'clock is prime time. So that's when I give the sermon. So part of the reason part of the thing I discovered when I was making videos was that making videos sort of put me in a flow state, and having conversations sort of puts me in a flow state. So that's sort of my flow state. Playing computer games too. So the only computer game I play regularly still is Civilization 6. And it's a long computer game. And I usually set the level way too high so that I reliably lose. But I actually find that enjoyable because it keeps it challenging enough. If I find I play a game that I reliably win, then I lose interest in it. And there's probably something to be said about my ministry career in that too. I enter into relationships that I will reliably lose because they hold my interest, instead of relationships that I will reliably win. And so I'm very comfortable with losing. So, Rick put up the meter. Why'd you put up the meter, Rick? I don't know. Why does Rick do what he does? We have no idea, but Rick is real. His mom says so. So that's sort of my flow state journey and maybe how it relates. And it's part of the reason I do these question and answers, and part of the reason I do the randos conversations. I answered a question in the comments this morning, again, because I get the regular thing that people are like, well, you have this link and I click on it and it's always full. Well, why is it always full? It's because if I learned when I first made the link that the program that I used just opens like 3 months of calendar slots. And then when I first did that, people just filled my calendar and I didn't have time to do my day job. So then I had to cut it way down, and it still opened up 3 months. And so the problem with my job is that 2 or 3 weeks from now, I often do my randos conversations on Wednesday mornings. 2 or 3 weeks from now, something might come up, which means I can't make it. So then I have to go to the rando and say, I can't make our appointment. And then it's like, well, can we reschedule? And then I'm back into the whole scheduling mess. And so that's why I started working with Calendly and those kinds of things to try to manage the randos conversations. So that's why I only open them up a week or two in advance, because I'm not quite sure what my schedule is going to be like a few weeks from now. So when I open them up, there's usually only 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 slots available, and they fill up within a day easily. And so that's why they always look full. And that's the best I can do with the randos conversations. Sometimes when people beg me hard enough, I'll just schedule one if the schedule works. But part of the issue also is that people, I try to do these sort of during business hours. And for a lot of people who have day jobs, they can't do it during business hours. So anyway, so randos conversations put me in a flow state. Podcasts put me in a flow state. Bible study puts me in a flow state. Computer games put me in a flow state. And being in a flow state is really cool. I mean, we as human beings really like flow states. So I discovered that, people sometimes say to me, how do you manage to do all that you do? How do you manage to be so productive? And the key is flow states. And the key is figuring out what things around you, what triggers a flow state for you. Because when you're in a flow state, I can write a sermon in a couple of hours, but I can write a sermon in a couple of hours. If I'm not in a flow state, I can waste a day on a sermon. And it's miserable because I write something and then I don't like it and then it's no good. Part of the downside of a flow state is it's deceptive. What do I mean by that? I'll get into a flow state, I'll write a sermon, and I'm in love with my sermon. And this is the whole thing about shitty first drafts. So then you sort of leave the flow state because you're in it for a few hours, and at the end of it, it's like the flow state's done and you're a little bit exhausted And so it's time to get up and do some push-ups in the sanctuary or drink some caffeine or go run an errand or something like this, because the flow state's done. My brain is sort of spent on that. So I'll go do some things that don't require a flow state, like go to the post office or go to the bank or rustle out the homeless people or pick up garbage and feces and on the church grounds, or you do all those things when I'm not in a flow state. Then I'll listen to a podcast or I'll listen to an audiobook while I do those things. And then I'm kind of refreshed. And so then maybe early afternoon, I got another project. So, okay, I'll get back into a flow state and I'll write a PowerPoint for a video. But the problem is when you're in the flow state, it's sort of like being on Adderall. You think all the work you're doing is good. And when you get out of the flow state and you look at it, it's like, what was I thinking? That's horrible. So you both sort of need the flow state and the non-flow state to actually have a little bit better perspective on your work, because the flow state is deceptive. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a physiologist, but I suspect Adderall and caffeine sort of help induce flow states. And that's part of the reason why they're so deceptive. Now, if you're playing a computer game, you're getting immediate feedback on your performance. So in that sense, your flow state probably isn't as deceptive as it is. And I think, I've heard people that tell me, I drive better when I've had a couple drinks. And everybody looks at that and says, nah, you just think you're driving better. You're not really. And so flow states are deceptive like that. So I'll go into a flow state, I'll get a draft of a sermon ready, or I'll get a draft of a PowerPoint for a video ready. And then I'll get into the video, let's say, with the PowerPoint that I've prepared for it. And in the middle of the video, I think, oh, this is a crappy video. This is a shitty first draft. What am I going to do with this? So then I'll start changing things. And I do find being in videos puts me in flow states, being in conversation. So there's my flow state story. Any comments or pushback or stories from the Discord room on that? Anybody identify, agree? Oh, Andrea, go ahead.
Oh, hi. No, I talk too much. I'll sit back and let someone else talk.
Did you unmute to say that you talk too much?
No, someone else was talking at the same time and I panicked and I was going to be quiet and let them go because I'm a nice Canadian.
Why don't you go ahead? It's quite all right. I would love to hear what you have to say.
Okay, it's not that interesting. But okay, I was just asking about flow states. I can't remember where. I think I was maybe asking about it on the Vervaeke server because I've been listening to, I finally started his Meaning Crisis series, and he was talking about flow states, and I was wondering if conversations could get you into flow states, because I feel like that would be characterize me. Like I think I get into flow states through good conversations, and I was wondering if I was just making that up or not. So
no,
thanks for sharing.
Definitely. So again, we're back at home. So when I was on vacation, my wife and I watched White Lotus. There's this really cool series on HBO right now about the 100-foot wave. That's really cool. But so now that I'm back at home, my daughter's like, Bachelors in Paradise is on. Let's watch it. So I get really bored with those programs. So I tend to play Civilization while it's on the TV. So I'm so bored. But so then you watch all these singles on this show. And of course, it's all this edited version. But the flow state, I would say that conversations, especially for these singles trying to fall in love and find their person, that's all flow state stuff too. It's some conversation. It's probably the difference between what we would say is a really good conversation and a conversation that you're just sort of sitting in and like, how long do I have to be in this conversation? So I think conversations definitely can induce flow states, and probably people that we look around and say are good conversationalists are probably people that are adept at both getting into a flow state themselves via the conversation and somehow jump starting the flow state in the other person. So, and again, I'm not a cognitive scientist or a psychologist, but I just listen to this language and I have life experience and I watch and I think so. I think that's the reality. I think conversations definitely can be flow state inducing, and I think conversations can induce cooperative flow states, or we could use that fancy Vervaeke word dialogos. So I think that's what John is talking about when he's talking about dialogos. I think he's talking about a collective flow state by which people leave it feeling like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But I'm going to insert again there my perspective that from within the flow state, there's a certain degree of deception because you're in love with the flow state and you're in love with the product of the flow state. And once the flow state is done and you stand back from it, you could look at it and say, yeah, it's a kind of a shitty conversation or a shitty idea. So.
Well, hopefully not the ones I'm recording. But yeah.
Well, let YouTube sort it out. You know, that's and I think it's the same for Bachelors in Paradise, because they'll have a really good conversation with someone and then something will happen or they'll go back and they can't get back to the flow state. And so I think when it comes to romance and falling in love, which all these, people want to do on Bachelor in Paradise, that's a lot of what's happening, I suspect. So, and then you get into the question of, there's this thing of like 50 questions. If you want to fall in love, go to a bar and try and find someone that you can begin to have a conversation with, which is, and John talks about this in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, this mutually disclosing thing. And so this is why, old married couples, they're probably people who were able to reliably put each other in flow state via conversation and other things. Married people have other ways of entering into different kinds of flow states. But then as years go by in marriage, there's all of these different elements of it, because one of the things that often happens, at least with our way of coupling in our society, is that you get infatuated, you fall in love, but then at some point in the marriage, you're going to have to transition from sort of this infatuation, being in love, feeling in love thing over into this much longer term, deeper love that develops in marriage, that can sort of not only continue to induce flow states, but different kinds of flow states, and usually from different kinds of things. So I think there's a lot to this flow state thing.
I would ask though, but why would you be inclined to trust your objective post facto analysis more than the experience of the flow state? Like, what's the justification for that? Because there are lots of reasons why people can convince themselves that they're objectively analyzing after the fact and actually are just doubling down on their own presuppositions.
I think you're right in being skeptical of that, and using the word objective, I think is probably questionable. What I think we can't do very well is access certain other parts of our experience when we're in a flow state. For example, if I'm in a flow state playing a computer game or watching a show or working on a sermon or reading a book, there's a lot of other things going on around me in my house, because of course I raised 5 kids, that I should be attentive to. Does the dishwasher need emptying? Do my kids need attention? Flow states are very tyrannical, because they sort of, it's me and the object of my attention in the flow state, and everything else can just go to hell. But that's not good for someone's life. One might look at, I was just talking to Rick about drug addiction because I deal with so much substance abuse with all the homeless people around me. In a way, someone's love with a bottle is just this extremely reliable flow state, and things like a marriage or a mortgage or a child just gets thrown by the wayside. And I think in our non-flow state moments, we're much more open to other things that demand attention that aren't necessarily flow state inducing. So that would be my argument. But what do you think, Nate?
No, I think that's good, and I think what you're pointing toward is what I would just say is like it's about it's about discernment of the good, because you don't really want to get caught up in a flow state over anything. So it's just like a flow state for the sake of a flow state is one thing. What you really want to get caught up is in the spirit, and that requires discernment of the good. I don't necessarily think that discernment is objective, though. That's why I offered just a tiny little bit of pushback.
Right. And I think you're right to push back on that word objective, because once I use that word, then we're into monarchical vision territory, and we don't have that. So I'd say that being in a flow state is monofocal, deeply monofocal, and that there's times and places for that monofocality, but because of the bandwidth that we as human beings need to operate with, that monofocality has to be treated with some care.
Sounds good to me.
My question is, so we have to have seek a good balance in this flow state between obsession and inspiration, and because sometimes being creative, there's a flow state there too, but as you were mentioning, there's like this obsession that can take over, that is driving a lot of stuff. So I was just interested in that. And you ever experienced that where it's kind of following you around throughout the day, sometimes these sermons?
Oh, absolutely. So getting back because of COVID, my wife and I took a 3-week vacation. I don't remember the last time I took 3 weeks off of work in a row. And I did that intentionally this year because I really didn't take any vacation last year because of the pandemic. And so I've noticed in the past that when I have taken long vacations, I get deeper levels of rest in me than I do when I take short vacations. And the reason is exactly how you describe. Because if I take a week off, then all these ideas, all these muses that are floating around me all the time, they continue to inhabit me. And if you follow along with my monologue videos, I mean, I'm just basically following muses around, and so different things colonize me. So now when I go on vacation, then my wife and I listen to the Christine Hayes Old Testament series, because that's, for her work, she has some things that made that relevant. I listened, somewhere along the line, I didn't shut myself off totally from social media. And then someone sends me the David French, Jordan Peterson, Mark Driscoll piece. And I read that. It's like, bang. But I know my wife said, you can do videos on vacation. You can do it while we're driving. Because what happens with she and I, we like taking these vacations where we spend hours and hours and hours in the car, because driving is sort of a flow state. But it also then she and I just get a lot of time for conversation, which is really healthy for our marriage. But then one of the things that's come into this lately has been we will listen to something together while we're driving, and that will spark other conversations. And so this is, part of the ways to keep the marriage fresh. So, but then I was listening to the Mars Hill, and that thing grabbed me. And then I was reading a Tom Holland book, and that thing grabbed me. But I intentionally didn't make any videos. So you're exactly right that this stuff sort of follows us around, and we have to be careful with it, though, because humanity needs this, and we all benefit from the fact that people get, an old phrase of people get a bee in their bonnet over all sorts of things. I mean, Jordan Peterson was, why is it that the Americans and the Soviets are trying to kill each other over ideas? And that just, part of what's interesting about Jordan Peterson, he's clearly the kind of person that is sort of obsessive, and an idea colonizes him, and he's just gotta beat the crap out of that thing and get it into submission. And the product of that is maps of meaning and all the stuff that he does. And many of us are sort of like that in this community. And we go down these rabbit trails and we get colonized by things. And if these extended interrupted flow states that we get into, if in the process we actually produce something of value and give it out there to the world, well, it's kind of how we make culture. So yeah, I think you're right, Chad. And by the way, thanks for the, I haven't set it up yet. I just opened it. Chad came by Living Stones, and he met Mark. He's kind of a cool little guy. I kind of like him. And so, yeah, it was fun. So I really would have loved to have met you and your wife, Chad, but it just the way scheduling goes. And I was in the Pacific Northwest, and I know a lot of you live up there, and I thought, oh, it'd be so cool to visit y'all. But then, my wife would be like, hey, is this a vacation or not? So I have to get up there when it's not a vacation. But
we just love seeing your church and meeting Mark. It was great. So thank you for what you do. With that, I will pass.
Okay. All right. Have we spent enough time on the flow state? Half hour? That's pretty good. All right. Scott Mack. Hey, my plug for PVK made it onto the Unbelievable podcast, and Justin said he definitely wants PVK on soon. Paul, have you talked to Justin about a topic? We have not. I just got back from vacation. Like I said, I've been up to my neck in homeless and feces and stuff that needs attention at church. So what would you like to discuss on Unbelievable, and how would you like to have a conversation, and who would you like to have a conversation partner there? I've thought about this a lot, actually, and I don't really know. Part of the reason my channel is the way it is I know sometimes, so if you're playing baseball or practicing baseball, I mean, you can throw the ball up and hit it to yourself, but it's always, back in the days when I'd play softball and church leagues and stuff, I'd always hit better when it's pitched to me. And so I think this actually gets into the flow state stuff too, because, I didn't expect a major podcast on the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And I didn't immediately connect Mark Driscoll and Jordan Peterson. And when all of those things aligned, it was like, oh, this is a window into all sorts of things I'm deeply interested in. And so right now I'm rereading Molly Worthen's Apostles of Reason, which is about the history of neo-evangelicalism in America. And so I'm rereading that because I need to brush up on American church history before I really dive into the substantive critique I want to give to Mark Cosper's critique of Mars Hill and all the particular and who he's picking for his people in there. So I think Justin could probably put me with a lot of different people. Actually, behind the scenes for a while, I was having some chattings with Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules after his conversation with Peugeot, and trying to, induce him into a conversation, because I'd like to have a conversation with him, because I think we could probably have a more productive conversation than he had with Jonathan. Although I loved his conversation with Jonathan. I love that moment when he's like, Like, you're not one of those people who believes that like Jesus rose from the dead and is coming to again. Yeah, that's exactly who Jonathan Peugeot is. More so than you can imagine. So I thought that was a hysterical conversation. So probably one of my favorite conversations I've had was my conversation with Vaush, because he is a guy who is known on the internet as he's known on the internet. And I got a message from the distributist right before that conversation that told me, don't talk to him because it's going to be terrible. He won't talk in good faith. And we had a really honest, good faith conversation. So I don't know who Justin would pair me up with, but he can put me with Tom Holland or NT Wright or Rationality Rules or Cosmic Skeptic. I don't really care who he puts me up with. I'll have fun with it. I don't know if it'll make great radio or podcasting, but yeah, so I'll talk to anybody. Y'all know that. I'll talk to anybody. So, yep. Also in 10 days, my wife and I are moving overseas with little kids. Wow, to France for a bit on the way to be there near Shelley's old neck of the woods. Did you have kids during your time in the Dominican? We had our first 2 kids in the DR, and then our third was born just on the cusp of moving back to North America. Can you offer any advice for parenting between worlds? That's a huge subject. Missionaries famously have third culture kids, and I've seen that go well, and I've seen it go poorly, because the missionaries are often we got an open mic in the room. Missionaries are, from one culture, and you never fully leave your language of origin and your culture of birth. Missionary kids are always straddling, and it both gives the missionary kids certain superpowers culturally, but it sometimes leaves them sort of living in limbo because they're never fully at home. Let's say if the missionaries come from North America, they're never fully at home in North America, and they're never fully at home in the other place. Now, a lot of it actually depends on where your children are born. So my oldest was born in the DR, and he was there until he was 6. And a lot depends on how long you stay there. So my wife too, my wife was born in America. She was adopted, and then her parents were missionaries in Nigeria. And so they moved her to Nigeria, and she spent the first six years of her life in Nigeria. But she didn't go to boarding school. Her older brother, there's a lot of variables in this. So, but France is really part of the West. And so some of those dynamics won't be the same. It's very different if you move to very much a third world country, or to a country with a culture that's radically different. So I don't want to say anything that would discourage you from doing this, because I think it actually, I'm sort of a third culture kid, because we lived and went to church in, really hardcore ghetto Patterson, but I went to school at the Dutch Calvinist CRC school, which again is another subculture. And we lived in melting pot, northern New Jersey, which is another culture. So I think part of the reason I am what I am and I do what I do is because I was raised so multiculturally. So yeah, and basically when you get overseas, you're going to make the best decisions you can in terms of what school they go to, who you hang out with. Are you going to sort of go native and basically completely immerse yourself in French culture and have French friends? Or are you going to go to France and sort of stick with the expat community? But the expat community in a country like France is so different. So, and you know, some of my friends, I tend to gravitate towards very multicultural people. So a friend of mine, Tim Blackman, who was the chaplain at Wheaton, he's a super multicultural person because his father grew up in the Jim Crow South, emigrated to the Netherlands, married a Dutch woman. He went to college in France. I mean, the guy speaks, I don't know how many languages. He goes to Calvin Seminary in Grand Rapids and meets a West Michigan girl and marries her. And, you know, and then he went back to The Hague for a while and did a church there. So there's so many variables in this, but I think it's a huge advantage you give your children when you raise them in the midst of all sorts of cultural seams, because it helps them learn multiple languages and multiple cultures. But it also sort of, it's hard for people raised like that to sort of fully immerse in one culture and be monocultural like many, many people are. So that's what I have to say about that. Benja, medical segregation, just something to maybe riff on. I don't know what I mean. Looks like to me, shut out of participation in culture and labor. This must be COVID stuff. I feel like I'm being thrown into the unclean caste, maybe because, let's say, you're unvaccinated or you don't want to wear a mask. Should I get a bell to ring as I enter the edge of town to warn the pure? Not after Delta. We're all potential carriers now, back again with the Delta variant. I feel a lot of resentment building in me that doesn't have a place in my life. Yeah, that's a danger. What am I to do about it? Well, would appreciate some insight. This is exactly the kind of thing that can both help you and requires you to, now I'm going to suddenly sound very reformed. Okay. So putting a warning out there. I'm about to say stuff that I borrow from people like Tim Keller. You really have to work on the gospel's penetration in your heart when you are a victim. Okay? What do I mean by that? Yesterday, I read a super interesting substack. It's the first substack I actually paid for. A super interesting substack by a guy who was raised Cuban, emigrated to America, so raised sort of nominal Catholic, and now is sort of in the process of exploring Judaism, who did a interview with Tom Holland. Ooh, that was a really good interview. And I don't know why I was tempted to go ahead and pay $5 for a monthly subscription. I might unsubscribe depending. I have to read more of his articles, see if it's worth $5 a month. But that is a super conversation. And they get into this whole victim thing. And this victim thing, what we see in wokeism is sort of diluted Christianity, credibility to the victim. Tom Holland is definitely right on that. But without the gospel transformation, which is the only way it's safe to be a victim. What do I mean by that? What we see happening in our culture with sort of victim signaling, let's call it, is I'm a victim. And then because of the way Christianity has impacted our culture, and nobody speaks better about this than Tom Holland. we then take that and become an oppressor using our victim status. And that's exactly what we see with wokeism. I am going to use my victim status. I'm going to use my victim privilege and become an oppressor of my enemies. That is not Christianity. Jesus does not use his victim status, him becoming our victim, to become our enemy. He uses our victimization of him to become our friend and our savior and our master. But this is the problem. If you are, now I'm really going to sound like a Calvinist. And so hang on, boys and girls, here we go. If you have an unregenerate heart, oh boy, did I just put down a theological line there. If you have an unregenerate heart, any kind of power that is placed in your hand, you may well use it to oppress your enemies. And this is why God, the Christian God, is the only God that's safe to worship. Because the Christian God, who is worshiped, turns enemies into children, his children. And I don't mean that in a belittling way. Turns enemies into heirs. I'll say it that way. And we see this in Christ. You know, on the cross, he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And he can be very direct and hard on people, but look at even how he handles Judas at the Lord's Supper. You know, a worldly person, oh, here's Judas, my betrayer. Get him, boys. You know, we're gonna lynch Judas so that he can't betray me. That's how the world works. How does Jesus work? Go do what you do quickly. And so, you know, now I know I just sort of made everybody nervous pulling out things like a regenerate heart and all of this antithetical stuff, but now I've also really energized the Anabaptists and the Christian anarchists in our midst, because this countercultural, counterworldly aspect of Christianity is so integral, and it's exactly what the woke get wrong. Because the privilege that you have set up by the societal dynamics of Christianity in our culture that privilege is not given you to dominate over your enemies and try to get them into alignment via shame, which is what's happening in our culture. It is to love your enemies and lay down your life for them. That's what power is for. And Peugeot gets this. You know, he says it in different words, but that's basically part of what he says, that those on the top of the hierarchy are there to serve those who are on the bottom of the hierarchy. And those on the bottom of the hierarchy are there to serve those on the top of the hierarchy. And we look at this as egalitarianism and say, no, there's no hierarchy. I said, no, there's always a hierarchy. And you're going to have a place on it. And your place will never be the top, because the top spot is already taken and it ain't you. And to try to presume and ascend to that top spot is basically the definition of Satanism. What you do in Christianity is recognize where you are in the hierarchy, and you recognize the privileges and powers that you have, and you use those to serve those who are beneath you, because that's why they have been given to you. And you are there to love your enemy. That is what Christians do. So now we're in a situation where there's very much an ascendant regime. I'm vaccinated. I have to find my mask again, because the mask thing has been happened. It's somewhere on my messy office, the mask that a lovely lady at church made for me. And this Sunday, when we have service again, I'm going to sing into a mask, and I hate it. But I do it because I have a room full of senior citizens, and I'm not going to name their name. Well, maybe I will, because if Lily or Maury or Nancy got COVID, even though they're all vaccinated, if they got COVID, I don't want to have it. I don't want to have my church be to blame. Now, okay, are vaccinations complex? Absolutely. Do I mind putting an experimental drug into my body for the sake of the world? No. Why? Because at this age, go ahead and experiment on me. I have a few decades left in this world. I'll happily be vaccinated for the sake of the people around me. That's Christianity. Now, the government doesn't work that way. The government works by the sword. And one of the things that you read in the New Testament is the Apostle Paul basically says the government's been given the sword, and it has it for a reason. Now, we can have a whole long conversation about the state and the church and the sword and all that, but you'll see some of the little Anabaptist influences in me that the church isn't given the sword. The state is given the sword. Christ has a sword, but look at, use Jordan Peterson's apocryphal meekness interpretation. The sword is sheathed. So go ahead. But now I also understand, and I don't despise those of you who say no to the vaccine and no to masks. I understand why you're saying that. And you've got a point too. And liberty is important. And so, but the way it's working in many of the communities, at least in the US and Canada, is that if you're sort of vaccine resistant and mask resistant, people are going to despise you. Now, you might hate the woke, but if you hate the woke like the woke hate you, you're just as guilty as the woke are of misusing the power and privilege you've been given. Because power and privilege is given to you to serve as Christ would have you serve. And so if you're an anti-vaxxer or an anti-masker, don't let that embitter you, or you will just become the opposite of the kinds of people you hate, who use their power and privilege to shame and use power over. Now I'm going to use some Greg Boyd language, use power over in order to dominate and have your way. That's not the way of Christ. So, yeah, and so that's why I say, as a Calvinist, and use Tim Keller language, young, restless, and reformed language, you need to go into the gospel and learn to love your cultural overlords even as they are doing evil. It doesn't mean you love the evil. It means you love your enemies. Because loving your enemies is not somehow advanced Christian living. Loving your enemies is basic Christian living. Now, Christians fail at it all the time because it's really hard, but that's one of these things that what it means to be a Christian is that you work on and you learn to love your enemies. And that's really hard in a real world situation. It doesn't mean you have to be nice to your enemies. It doesn't mean you have to agree with your enemies. Sometimes loving your enemy means standing against them politically or other ways, but there are limits to that. And this is where I think what a lot of, the Anabaptists and the anarchists, they have some real points in this arena, and they're strong in this arena. But, even as a Calvinist, who's a magisterial Calvinist like I am, not one of those Baptist Calvinists. I don't understand how you can be that. It just caused a whole nother problem. But you really have to let the gospel work in your heart and say, all right, my enemies have power over me, and they're going to ostracize me, and they're going to shame me. But these are my convictions. And again, this is where I think the Anabaptists and have a really strong tradition, because I'm rereading Molly Worthen's Apostles of Reason. And, during the Second World War, Anabaptists basically pioneered the idea of conscientious objectors. And there's a really cool movie, I don't remember what movie that is, of this conscientious objector who, the movie came out recently. It's a great movie. I mean, people treated him like crap because to be not down with the war against Japan and Germany in the Second World War meant to be a serious social outcast. And the Anabaptists said, we want to be loyal Americans, but we will not fire a gun at our enemies. And I remember in this movie, this guy rescued, this battle just went all kinds of bad ways. And this guy who had been brutalized by the army for his status as a conscientious objector, this guy saved so many people. I mean, he put his life on the line without a gun in his hand. And that's a deeply powerful Christian witness. So if you're suffering from medical segregation because of issues of conscience, that you think it is a betrayal of your love of Christ and your love of neighbor to wear a mask and get a vaccine, that's going to force you to either become embittered and just be the mirror opposite of wokeism, or go deeper into the gospel and love your enemy and figure out how then to do that really nuanced, really difficult work of loving an enemy. But if you can grow in learning to love an enemy, boy, you can, the light of Christ can shine through you, because that's sort of the kryptonite against the dominion of this world. That's the power that overcame Rome. That's the thing that Christ brings to the table. It's like, I love that scene in Lord of the Rings in the movies when Gandalf is going to go out there and try and rescue Faramir. And so he's going out into the field and the Nazgul are coming, and Gandalf just puts up his staff and this light goes out and the Nazgul have to flee. Learning to love your enemy in an unpopular way, that's like that light. It just, when it's unleashed in this world, the power of darkness cannot stand against it. And if you, by virtue of conscience, have decided to take a deeply countercultural, unpopular stand, it's in contexts like that you can learn to bear that light. It doesn't come from you. It comes through you from Christ. So it's a great question. I hope my answer was helpful. All right. Jacob. Anthony and I have decided that the question and answer is not liturgical enough. Can you wear a collar? I'd have to buy one. I still don't own one. I should. So some of my colleagues, actually my friend Eric, who's over in Davis, he wears a collar. And it's tempting for me sometimes, but for very non-religious reasons. I am a very, I could totally do the Steve Jobs thing and just wear a black mock turtleneck every day of the year. I could totally do that, because dressing myself has always been a chore. It's like, oh, what am I going to wear? I bought this shirt at Costco. I like shopping at Costco. Why? Because the clothes are cheap. The problem with shopping at Costco is I'm kind of strangely slender and tall, and so things don't always fit that well. So wear a collar for the question and answer. I see your point. Or can Rick green screen I don't even know what that's some Jewish thing, I'm sure. Onto you. You're going to green screen something onto me? Should I wear a green shirt? So if I wore a green screen shirt, I don't know if we could trust Rick with that. Rick would have way too much fun with that. More serious.
A chasuble is what bishops wear in the Roman Catholic Church during liturgy.
Oh, well, my friend Eric always calls me his bishop. So, although I've never tried the submission thing, say, Eric, you must submit. More seriously, has society finally had enough of the supposed authenticity of wearing jeans into services yet? Society is a really big thing. But the fact that, so again, my father wore collars those early years at Northside, and then in the 70s and 80s gave them up and then wore suits sometimes for preaching. But collars and vestments are even coming back in the Christian Reformed Church in some ways. That's a huge, nuanced history. And it's very deeply tied actually to a lot of the history I want to get into when I get into the rise and fall of Mars Hill, because that gets into really American church history, which is, what was I watching? What was I thinking? So I listened to that whole Christine Hayes. Jacob, have you listened to that Christine Hayes Old Testament? It's all modernish, but she's
excellent. I disagree with a lot of stuff she says, but it's an incredible. I think everybody should watch it. I should listen to it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. There's just so many interesting things in this world and interesting people in this world. This is why, my friends, there is a resurrection, and there is an age to come, because why would God give us all these very interesting things and not give us the time to go deeper into them? So that's why I believe in the resurrection. All right. Christian Golden, Civil Samaritan. Ooh, interesting new thing. If you came home to an Amazon delivery from a rando, what would you hope would be in the box? Answering this question is very dangerous, obviously. I have no idea. Yeah, this is the problem I have with myself, or one of the problems I have with myself. People ask me, what's your favorite blank? And it's like, I have no idea. What's my favorite food? Probably the food that's in my mouth right now. I don't know what I'd hope for from an Amazon box. And this, my wife and I have gotten to the point in our marriage where we no longer gift each other, because what we wind up doing is we give each other what we want. And then my wife is like, because she knows that I'm just this nerd and I like computers and gadgets and electronics and cameras and all this kind of stuff. But then she tries to buy stuff for me, but the realm is so particular. She has no idea what I'm interested in. I mean, probably, me and Rick, we sit back and we nerd out on things, and even at 10 o'clock this morning, we're like, there's a bug in the system. And I just watch Rick make this show. In order to make it better, makes it so much more complex. It's like, I don't know if anybody can run this thing except Rick, but that's kind of how we nerd out. And so I nerd out on those kinds of things. And my wife is like, I can't buy you anything because I have no idea what you would want. And the same is true for buying stuff for my wife, because like jewelry or clothing, it's a disaster. I buy her something and it's like, she doesn't like it. So it's kind of gauche out and just give her a little money. So we try to do other things for each other. It's my wife's birthday today. So she just decided pies. It's going to be pies this year, because on our trip, whenever we drove past a place that said homemade pies, it's like, oh, we got to stop. And then we got to eat some pie someplace. And the problem with my wife is that my wife can eat anything and not gain any weight. And so she'll order like 3 things for dinner, and I'll have to eat most of it because she won't finish it. And my Dutch Calvinist background just doesn't let me leave a food on my plate. So I gain the weight and she picks at the restaurant. So I can never buy her anything. So I have no idea how to answer this question, but it's a very nice thought. So thank you, Christian. I appreciate it. And the problem too, same problem with books, is I get an idea of a book. And now, at least with Amazon Kindle, I've learned that if I get all excited about a book, I first order the sample. And if I actually read the whole sample, then I'll buy the book. So, but trying to guess what book I'll be interested in next, I don't know what book I'll be interested in next. So good luck. Indie Defense. When the mark of the beast arrives, will people be able to recognize it? The mark of the beast is always with us. there's a big theological debate as to whether there will be a grand finale to it, or is it an existential reality that is always with us? Many have noted that in Revelation 666 is Nero. But and then there's this great tradition. The rest is history has a good episode on Nero, all given to him. Fascinating guy. It's sort of like asking, will Nero come at the end of the world? So there's this tradition of the second coming of Nero. That's out there too. And this is where you kind of have to get into the Pageauian symbolic space, because is Hitler Nero? Sort of. Is Hitler Antichrist? Sort of. How about the papacy? Is the papacy Antichrist? Protestants for years held that belief. Now, many Protestants in America would say no, but now you got some Catholics saying, "Oh, maybe the Protestants were right, and this one." So the way to think about prophecy and eschatology is with a huge dollop of symbolism. So will world history be drawn to a conclusion in a climactic episode? Could be. And I think when nuclear weapons and during the Cold War, suddenly there was a realization that, yeah, we could destroy this whole thing. So it's a good question. I ask because I've been nervous about the overzealous of governments and corporations towards pushing COVID vaccine. It seems that something like this would be a perfect way for Antichrist to get people to take the mark. Social Security numbers were considered the Antichrist. Social Security was considered, FDR was 666. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. So on one hand, it's always sort of good to keep an eye out for this stuff. It's also good to have a little bit of humility about it. It's really fun reading history because at almost every age throughout the history of Christianity, a good numbers of Christians have said, we're living in the last times, and they've produced evidence to warrant it. Are there elements of one world government when a one world pandemic? How about the United Nations? Is that one world government? So when the United Nations was founded, certain numbers of Christians started getting nervous about that as the Antichrist. So how about Islam? How about the papacy? This stuff goes in a lot of different ways. So, but the symbolism is helpful, because what symbolism, the kind of symbolism that Pageau is really tutoring us all into, sort of helps show us the relationships between things. And again, I've been vaccinated, and I think the vaccinations are good, but I think we have to understand them for what they are. And what human beings tend to do is take something and run it up the hierarchy too far. So are the vaccines going to be the answer to the pandemic? Well, maybe not. Are they an answer to the pandemic? They sure have helped in some ways. The key insight of idolatry is that it is in human nature to take an important thing and turn it into an existential thing. And there is only one God, and you and I are not it. So you don't lose status in my mind for having these suspicions, because I think it's actually healthy in a population to have a good bit of that healthy suspicion in a population. Now, it can get manifest in all kinds of crazy ideas, like, in getting injected with the vaccine will somehow make you magnetic. I heard that and I thought, shoot, being magnetic could be kind of fun. You know, why didn't I get the magnetic version of the vaccine? Where's my magnetism? Being injected with the vaccine, there's little microchips that they're going to track you. I don't know. I think I not only signed up for being tracked, I pay for it every month. So, but at the same time, hey, you got a point. There's potential in all the stuff that's going on. And, you know, 6 months ago, we were talking about the Great Reset and there's all worried about that. If you're able to sort of take a step back and listen to all of the ideas as they flow and remember, pay attention. I mean, in the 1980s, all kinds of my Christian friends were reading Hal Lindsey, 1980, Countdown to Armageddon. Here, and they opened their Bible and they saw the great Russian bear is the Antichrist, and they're going to come down into the Middle East and get all that oil in the United States. And maybe didn't happen. ISIS had this whole fascination about getting this one Syrian town, and okay, we don't know. So just be comfortable about not knowing. And when people have ideas, listen to them. There's a lot of crazy ideas that have been proven right. And there's a lot of crazy ideas that are just crazy ideas. Sorting them out and figuring out which is which, that's the hard part. So keep an open mind, listen carefully, think hard. Yeah, that's what I think. The government's always too overzealous. Go ahead.
I interrupted you when you were going to talk about what Christine Hayes said, and I was just hoping you could remember what you were going to say.
Well, Christine Hayes was helpful in terms of me gaining a better understanding of certain aspects of Jewish history and Judaism. So I always want to learn more, but I always want to learn more about everything. And that then forces a hierarchy. And so I want to spend some time on her lectures. I might do some commentary on some of her videos. I thought they were really good. And again, like you and I are both on sort of the opposite of a certain divide, because in a secular classroom, she tries to approximate this objective view of the Bible, which is laughable. And so there's some stuff to look in there, but there's a lot of good stuff in that. And I agree with you. I think those are someone had messaged me and said, I really enjoy the Jordan Peterson stuff on the Bible. Can you point me to any other Bible videos? And it's like, that's really hard, because I like the Bible Project, but that's very much nested in sort of a evangelicalism. I like Christine Hayes's video. That's clearly nested in a modernist university place. So everything's nested in something. And so part of what I try to do on my channel is at least give people a picture of the landscape. So when they listen to Christine Hayes, they'll say, oh, I can learn a lot from this, but I should be aware of the filters that are being, all of this stuff is flowing through, because that's always the subtext beneath the stuff. And it's exactly the same stuff I'm going to do when I start digging into the Mars Hill stuff. So I don't remember what I was going to say. So sorry. Things fly out as fast as they fly in. All right. Matthew, will John the Baptist be the best man at Jesus' wedding to the church? Oh, what a good question. If so, who's the maid of honor? Mary seems the obvious choice, but she may be busy being mother of the groom and all. It's a great question. I can't answer that. It's a great question. I like it. Okay. LDAvism. LDavism. I don't know when Paul is planning another Q&A. Let's see. August 20, 10 a.m. But I'm 40 plus weeks pregnant. Oh, boy. So I'm just going to leave here and hopefully see it at some point. Hi, Paul. Maybe you have a lot of time nursing, I know, and maybe probably some midnight hours nursing, because when those babies get born, their time is all flipped upside down. They're awake when mom wants to sleep, and they're asleep when we're all awake. Love babies. Babies are great. Have babies, people. Have babies. Hi, Paul. I just have to know if you've read the novel Gilead. I have, by Marilynne Robinson. I'm about a third-generation Calvinist pastor of a little dying church in Iowa in the 1950s. The book is written as a long letter to his young son. Yes, because he's an old pastor and he married a young wife, and that's a wonderful series of books. Full of theological reflection of a beautiful incarnate kind. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 2005, and it's been very meaningful to me. I hate to burden you with more reading suggestions. I read it a number of years ago, so it isn't fresh in my mind. But whenever you talk about the family history of your vocation, I always wonder, yeah. Okay, and August or September would be an excellent time of year to read this book. Okay, well, you just kind of put it in my mind, and if things align in a certain way, I might pick it up again. It's a lovely Marilynne Robinson. Marilynne Robinson is interesting because she's sort of a progressive Calvinist, politically progressive, but she is a Calvinist. And some of her older books, her less popular books, and her books of I have them, her books of essays. Really thoughtful, insightful essays. She's a brilliant writer, and she's got a great mind. So yeah, those are lovely books. Yeah, good stuff. All right, Josh, do you have any particular advice would you like to give to someone trying to convince their local church to do an estuary like events? Especially a Reformed church that's narrow-minded roots and might not be comfortable with certain things being discussed within their building. Talk to John Van Donk, because John Van Donk has worked a lot on these kinds of things. I would say one of the best ways to get a church to do something is to do it yourself. And then if it starts to be fruitful and meaningful, the church will come along. That there's nothing, churches are by nature skittish and a little timid and fearful. So, and that's a healthy thing. That's, skittish and fearful and timid things survive. Bold things die. Curiosity killed the cat for a reason, because cats are small. So your church is hesitant for good reasons. So I would say start your own estuary group. And if you've got, just ask your church. Don't ask your church to endorse it. Just maybe ask the church for space. And if the church says no, do it in a restaurant. But start meeting with people and get a group going. And you'll probably invite someone else from your church to go. And then people will start hearing about it. And they'll start hearing about, well, these conversations are really fertile. And that's sort of the way to colonize a church. Start doing something and have it be good. And when the church sees you doing it and kind of sees that it's okay and it's healthy and it's productive, then suddenly everybody will want to be a part of it and think it was their idea. So that's the way to colonize a church. Churches aren't hard to colonize. They're really not, as long as you're doing something of value. Churches will embrace almost anything of value. They're so desperate for relevance and to do something good in the world. So that's my advice. Is John Calvin more Augustinian than the Pope? Which Pope? Calvinists think that's true. There's a lot of sides to Augustine. Augustine is a deeply complex, foundational thinker. And often what happens, and he wrote so much, often what happens when you have someone like that is so Calvinism will sort of take a certain element of Augustinianism and elevate it up a hierarchy. And the Roman Catholics will take other things and elevate that. Protestantism comes out of the Western Latin Church. And if there's ever a time to see that clearly. It's now that we've got the light of orthodoxy shining on the Latin church. And so now suddenly, you talk to a guy like Nathan Jacobs, or, who Nathan Jacobs got a PhD at my alma mater and left there and became Orthodox. Boy, that's gotta hurt. But so now, it's an exciting time to be a Christian, because all of this stuff that's just sort of been way out there to the east is all coming into America, and it's coming online, and it's saying, hey, did Augustine really get that right? Should we really think this way about some of these doctrines? Or maybe the East has something. Maybe the church fathers have something to say. Well, which church fathers? Well, some of those church fathers. So part of what's happening now with the rise of the Orthodox on the American scene is that perhaps the theological diet will get rebalanced with a little bit more East and West, and that'll probably help the West, might even help the East. So we'll see where it goes. It's really cool. It's an exciting time to be alive, boys and girls. It's an exciting time to be a Christian. For randos,
I would just
go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to point out that Augustine didn't agree with himself, which is why he wrote the Retractionis. So it's like early Augustine and late Augustine are very different. The pressures of being a bishop seem to have changed his mind on a lot of things. So it all depends on what Augustine you're talking about.
Yeah, and different people feed off different parts. So it's a great point. Thanks, Nate. See, Nate should be doing this. Nate has a channel. I haven't listened to a lot of Nate's videos. I listen to his videos where he tells his story, because of course I'm very nosy about people's stories, but Nate's doing some great stuff with his channel. So if you're not subscribed to Nate's channel, I mean, the dude's just so freaking smart. He's read so much, so it's really good.
Grail country.
I noticed, Luke, that you said to oh shoot, now I forget her name. You said in one of your comments, boy, this is the first Vanderclay video I've gotten all the way through in a long time. So it's like you just take a little. You're one of these people that's bending my algorithm, Luke. What's the deal? Don't you love me anymore?
It's not you, it's me. I've just been busy.
I love Luke. Oh, it's so much fun. All right. Chad asks for a discussion about prayer and what it truly means. My advice would be, you can talk about prayer, but do it more than you talk about it. And when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gives us the direction that he does in the Sermon on the Mount on prayer, we should follow it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about prayer and teach about prayer. But my first advice for people who want to know how to pray is, well, start doing it. Well, I don't know how. Well, Jesus gave you a prayer to start with. Start with that prayer. And this is sort of where the Roman Catholics have a point, where it's, don't know how to pray? Here's a prayer. Start with this prayer and pray the prayer a lot. Job prays the rosary. I mean, if I prayed the rosary as a young person, I would have been in trouble with the church because of the anti-Catholicism. That's part of the American story that I'll get to with the Mars Hill stuff. But start with that prayer and just start praying. And then you'll probably find books like Brother Lawrence, and there's a lot of books on prayer. Richard Foster, and read some of those and start playing around with prayer. Well, what about praying the Psalms? What about praying adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication? What about basically listening to God before bombarding God with my anxieties and my requests? So I'd say, what does it mean? Prayer is, I don't know, what does conversation mean to your relationship with your wife? What is emptying the dishwasher or taking out the garbage or bringing home a paycheck or marital fidelity mean to your wife? It's we can put a lot of words on these things, but a lot of these things are things that aren't primarily words. So that's my answer to that. Chad the Alcoholic, is there a way we as Christians or even not Christians set aside our prejudices and share Christ's love or agape with others? Yes, sometimes by keeping our mouth shut and loving our enemies. That's key. That's foundational to this whole enterprise. And that's this light of Christ that when it gets revealed and when Christ flows through us with that radical love, the darkness has to flee. It can't stand against it. You know, if it's the power of Christ in our midst, this radical love to one another. Nothing can stand against it. Is there something higher than our fixed ideas about God? Ideas are just ideas. They're what we need, but it's so funny. And now, of course, a lot of the critique about Protestantism that it's too propositional, there's a real important critique in there, but you can't live without propositions. People can't live without ideas, but the love that you have for your spouse is not fundamentally an idea. We use ideas to try to understand it. We use ideas to talk about it. We use ideas to conceptualize it and manage it and manipulate it and try and grow in it. But the love that you have is not fundamentally an idea. It's love. And it gets manifest in words. It gets manifest in actions. It gets manifest in how many things. Now, again, part of the problem that we face is that we're doing all this stuff via words and books and now video. So that's words. But this is just the crust on the thing itself. Love is the thing itself. And so we're to love God. Jesus doesn't say, have ideas about God. Well, you're going to have ideas about God because you just need to have ideas because we're human beings. But he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Have ideas about God. Yeah, you're going to have them. But I think when we stand and give an account for our life, he's not going to say, so what ideas have you had about me? He's going to say, have you loved me? Have you loved your neighbor? That's what we're judged on. New Testament's very clear on that. We're judged on how we have lived, not the ideas that we've had. Now, because we're human beings, our ideas and how we live are very integral, and ideas can very much shape how we live. How we live very much shapes our ideas. But the ideas are just this necessary human thing that we have by virtue of our biology and our culture and all of this stuff. But the ideas are not the thing itself. Your wife is not an idea. She's a woman. You are not an idea. You're a man. Love is not an idea. It's love. So we use ideas to see it. That God brings us all together. What do we do with it if it exists? Now, being all together is not an idea. It's a state of being. And even that, so I just put an idea on it. So we just can't escape it. But don't have an idolatry of ideas. Love your neighbor. You can think about loving your neighbor all you want. That's not loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor is loving your neighbor. Thinking about loving your neighbor is something that might be helpful in terms of knowing how to love your neighbor, but it's not a substitute. And that's a big problem with Protestantism, because Protestantism majored in thinking. We needed to think, but thinking is not a substitute for being. All right. Charlie Brown, I have a set of questions that have been somewhat relevant, especially as a married man. Would it have been different if Christ had been married? from the Gospels, I believe Christ had a very clear idea of his vocation. I think it would have been irresponsible for him to take a wife and have the vocation he needed to have. And I think he knew that, which is why I think Christ was not married. The Apostle Paul, was the Apostle Paul married earlier in life? That's a question that gets pushed around. We have no evidence that he was. If you read what he writes about marriage, it seems that Paul, perhaps in the same way, decided that for the sake of his vocation, it's better not to marry. And I completely understand that. Because I have a wife and because I have children, they require of me time and attention that otherwise could have been devoted to Christian ministry. I can understand the Roman Catholic, since the Cluny reforms, basically their demand that priests remain celibate. It's not just that they don't marry. It's a little hard. Long history with dealing with that, but and it's listening to Paul. But at the same time, I have certain knowledge, because I am a married man and a father, that would be very difficult for a single man. He might have ideas about it, but I have experience that upon which my ideas are based, and we recognize the validity of that. So I think because of Christ's particular vocation, it makes sense that he did not marry. Could he have been Messiah in marriage? Yes, but that'd be rough to work through. And that's part of the point of this is a complexity of Christianity. And the New Testament tries very hard to say things like marriage is good and singleness is good. Don't put them opposed to each other. You say, yeah, but there are advantages to marriage and there are advantages to singleness. Yes, there are. Which is better? I don't know. Better for you? We would not have humanity. We would not have culture. We would not have all the blessedness we have in this world without marriage. But we would not have many of the other good things we have in this world without singleness. So let's not make two things the enemy of each other. They can both be good. Which is better? Are there hierarchies? Yes, but hierarchies are very complex things. And so Christians have to ask themselves, should I marry? And I think most Christians, especially in a Protestant context, will say marriage is a good thing. Most of us have, this gets off into all kinds of things. Maybe that's where you want me to go. I don't know. Aside, very few mentions of his. He seems to be strangely silent on the issue. There's not a lot in the Bible from Christ. I mean, there's the 4 Gospels, lots of repetition within them. And this, again, as a Protestant, we kind of have difficulties with this for the same question that Chad asked, because, well, we just need more ideas. Probably not. Almost everything Christ said and did, you can find in the Old Testament. It's not a lot new. Now, because of his status for Christians, he modulates the Old Testament, and some things are greater in significance and some things are less significant. Okay. I think he said enough about marriage for us to know. Now, as an individual, if the question of marriage is germane, and that might be because you're single and want to marry, or it might be because you're married and don't want to be married, or you're struggling in your marriage, and I just need more information. Well, talk to Christians. Because, but again, as with the idea thing, you can read every book on marriage that's ever been written, and there's a lot of them. All of that information might inform you, but you still have to act and live and be in your marriage. So the ideas can be helpful, but being married is not an idea. So it doesn't necessarily solve anything. And that's some of the idolatry of information and idolatry of ideas that we struggle with, especially in a channel like mine, where if you're into my channel, you're an idea person. Oh, Job, making sure Rick gets his exercise. Thank you, Job. Just Rick's getting bed sores over there, you know, in front of the vMix computer. So thank you, Job. Where are we? Was he intending to repeat the obvious that was already represented to Israel in the Old Testament? Did he experience something akin to infatuation or desire towards women? By virtue of the book of Hebrews, most pastors have said, you know, he understood sexual desire. He was a man. So I think it would have been irresponsible for him, given his vocation, to marry. The Apostle Paul clearly thinks it's preferable in his vocation to not marry. I think it is a legitimate thing for Christians to decide, for the sake of their vocation, to not marry. It was unusual in the first century and the Second Temple period for a man of 30 years to not be married. I'm sure there were plenty of them. Because you have the potential of polygamy, there were probably fewer women who weren't married. Now, again, as the history, I mean, if you study this history, I don't know it in terms of the Eastern Church, but in terms of the Western Church, if you study this history, it's a fascinating history, because you get to the time of Augustine, and this is when sort of celibacy becomes hot. And you have these women freaking out their parents because they decide to embrace chastity and marry Christ and Christ alone. And the family's like, wait a minute, we made a financial, familial obligation that you would marry this person. But marriage was a very different thing. Marriage for us is this weird, anomalous identity thing that we're doing. And again, watching these Bachelor shows, it's a mess. It's a mess. These shows are roach motels for highly attractive young North Americans to lure them in and torture them. That's what these shows are. You want to get more likes on Instagram? Come on this show. Make sure you spend lots of time in the weight room if you're a dude, or, you know, make sure you have, you know, tiny percentage of body fat and a really hot bikini if you're a woman. And it's just nuts. Marriage is a huge topic, but most people, at least in North America at this point, will be married at some point. If being single is blessed, marrying is blessed. Being single is hard, marrying is hard. Having children is wonderful. Having children is really hard. That's life. Christ won't answer your marriage question for you with ideas. Bring your marriage struggles to him in prayer and let him and his sovereignty work in your life. Catherine, how do you work to balance between teaching, guiding your kids, and giving them room to grow, develop on their own? Holy cow, what a hard question. Oh, again, with things like this, there are so many variables. My father was not a directive individual. And so my first draft of fatherhood is from my father, who was not a directive individual. My father didn't say a lot of things about do this, don't do that. And I didn't as a father. Now that my children are in their 20s and I listen to them, it's very interesting the things they remember and the messages that they remember from me. Because sometimes I listen to them and I think, did I say that? Would I have said that? So much of it is what I do and how I am. And so personality is so integral to this. I've seen some people who are fathers who are wonderfully directive. And as a culture, we sort of have elevated that because I think, again, part of that is what we can put in movies. And so, you know, you've got Superman's father or Spider-Man's father, you know, or uncle, what's his head? With great power comes great responsibility. And sort, you know, great fathers are people who spin little yarns and give proverbs to their kids. So sometimes maybe fathers are silent. Maybe fathers are verbose. Everybody's going to be a father in their own way. And when I almost always get these parenting questions, I think the one thing I feel most strongly about is be the person you want your children to become. And that will then manifest in words and it'll manifest in action. That's a crushing thing to say because if you have any degree of self-criticism, you look at yourself and say, gosh, I'm not even the person I want to be. And it gets worse when you get older because I look back as now someone in my late 50s and look back at who I was. I married at 25. My first child came along when I was 28. And I look at my 30-year-old self sometime and think, oh, we have family video because you got a video recorder, blah, 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 blah. It's a big, massive thing where you put VHS tapes in and hold this massive thing on my shoulder. We've got some videotapes from, you know, when my first children were small. And I look at myself in these videos and I just think, oh, was I really that guy? Those videos are hard to look at because I think I wish I was better. I wish I was better for my children. I wish I was better for my life, for my wife. I wish I was better for my Lord, but I wasn't. But now I look back at myself also with a bit of mercy because I say I was also young. And I think if you can, it's good to get married young. Grow up with your spouse if you can hold the marriage together. If you can, you know, life is hard. Life is hard. Marriage is hard. Parenting is hard. It's also deeply meaningful. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes. And by God's grace, you know, receive his forgiveness and let his forgiveness sink in. Don't burden yourself with the regrets of the past. When God pronounces you forgiven, forgive yourself. But you still live with the consequences. And one of the hard things, one of the things I've seen with adults when I listen to them work through the stuff from their childhood, parents who tell their who are very preachy, but don't live by what they preach, or they preach and live by things they shouldn't, that doesn't go well. And so my father, who wasn't at all preachy at home. He was a preacher, but he wasn't at all preachy at home. Probably wasn't a bad strategy because at least he wasn't a hypocrite. At least not too bad of a hypocrite. We're all hypocrites. So, and with children, you know, now my kids are in their 20s and they're making decisions for their lives. The decisions they make for their lives, not always what I would recommend for them. When do I say something? When do I keep silent? A lot of that depends on whether I think what I will say will actually have a positive effect. And sometimes you can say something and say, I'm going to tell you this now. 5 years from now, you'll probably realize it's truth. And you might be pissed at me for some of those years for having said this. There's a place for that too. But you got to play that card really carefully. So it's wisdom. It's wisdom. I don't know. I don't know if I have a lot of advice in there, except again, be the person you want your children to become. That's the one piece of advice I have that I can really stand on, because the kids don't know what they're doing either. They're young. They're reacting and they're thinking and they have ideas, and I watch them with their ideas and their reactions, and I watch what they say and I watch what they do, and I think, yeah, it's what it's like to be a human being. It's what it's like to be young. I've been blessed with wonderful kids. I love my kids. They're truly wonderful, but they're young. And my daughter, one of my daughters yesterday, she sort of got her first adult job, and it's a difficult job. It's a starting level thing, but she comes home and she's like, I don't think I'm doing good work, and I don't think I know what's going on. And she just got started in it. And I said, honey, but she says, but everybody tells me I'm doing a good job, but I don't feel like I'm doing a good job. I says, honey, you're working with people who've been working those jobs a lot of years. They understand what it's like to start. They understand how much you don't know. You can't know it. You're just young. In time, you'll learn it. And, she's like, maybe I should get a new job because I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I said, no, just sit pat. If your bosses, if your colleagues are encouraging, and I've listened to her because she was working at home for a while, and I listened to her on the phone and at work, and I was impressed by what I heard. I thought, wow, she's articulate. She's smart. She's doing great. But she looks at herself and says, that's because she's comparing herself against people who've been doing this for years, and people who have, I said, give yourself a break, sweetheart. You're young. You'll grow into it. Don't worry. I remember getting to the Dominican Republic right out of seminary, and I'm thinking, I don't know what the heck to do. I don't know what I'm doing. This is a disaster. And all the other missionaries are like, yeah, they didn't say that. They're like, you're doing fine. Keep doing what you're doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm sure Job, now with his new baby, feels that way often. Okay. Chad the alcoholic again. Hello, Paul. I hope your vacation was splendid and satisfying. I recently was struck by the thought that if religions were merely mythology and fairy tales, stories to inspire principles and ideas for living, why then did the ancient gods of the Greeks and the Mesopotamian gods only survive as what seems to be fictional? Yeah, good point. They also thought of history differently. Where the Abrahamic religions and the Buddhist religion seem to be more true or apocryphal in the minds and hearts of today. Any thoughts on this? I think you're onto something there. Part of what Peterson didn't really say outright, but is implicit in a lot of his biblical stuff, is sort of this Darwinian perspective on history, which is sort of like Nassim Taleb's Lindy effect, where history sorts through things, and in some ways, truer things last. Now, that doesn't mean old lies don't last. They tend to be perennial. They keep coming around. And I think Vervaeke is right that that's sort of a function of cognition and structures and all of that. And so lies will be around with us for a long time, and repeated lies too. But true things have a durability about them. And very much the Abrahamic religions and some of the Eastern religions, to the degree that they got a bunch of things right, they endure. And now with we're 500 years into globalization, basically, and the fact that globalization, Protestantism, and atheism sort of come together is not incidental. Okay, so all of these religions are going to be talking to each other, but these processes take centuries to work through. So it's going to be very interesting to see. Christianity impacted China before. Look up some of the stuff with the Boxer Rebellion. Fascinating. It's another thing that I got mentioned on The Rest is History, and I thought, oh yeah, I really want to look into that. But Christianity is having another deep dive into China. What's that going to do to the relationship between Christianity and Buddhism? and the relationship between Christianity and Confucius. Boy, you know, because in the West, we've got Jerusalem and Athens. And we've been working on that puzzle for 2,000 years or longer. How about Jesus and Confucius, or Jesus and Buddha? And, you know, some of the ways people handle it now, it's just way too trite. Oh, there's Jesus and there's Buddha. They're kind of the same. It's like, well, it's way, way too trite, my friends. It's way too low resolution. So, yeah. And yet, you know, you can't read the New Testament and not, or the Old Testament, not get some appreciation. Well, what did those Hebrew prophets do? Those Hebrew prophets changed the world. And again, Christine Hayes's early talk, her first lecture on that, she's exactly right. Those Hebrew prophets changed the world. And, you know, Tom Holland sees that too in this conversation that he had with this Cuban that's interested in Judaism. Jesus wouldn't be Jesus without the prophets. Now you might say, oh, what does that do to Christology? Well, we're Trinitarian, and so the same spirit that moved the prophets moved Jesus. Oh, theology's hard this way. That's why you don't just look at Sam here and say, Sam, be banished, you non-Trinitarian. Sam's paying attention. He's a smart dude. You listen to him. You know, Jacob's around here. Jacob's a smart dude. He knows a lot. Judaism is this rich, you know, Christianity is this, Christianity is one of the arms of, it's a Jewish splinter group. Still is. Now, along the way, it added Greeks and all kinds of other things. But Christianity is a Jewish splinter group. So is Islam. The world is like that. So, all right. Oh, questions have been added. Let's see. Indie defense. The two best theories I've heard, what are we, 11:48? We're doing good. The two best theories I've heard is that, one, they were unknowingly worshiping the Watchers Nephilim, and after they disappeared, the stories began to be passed down. And two, the theory of bicameral mind. That's interesting. How Christians should regard other religions. That's a complicated question. And there tends to be the antithetical camp, and there tends to be the progressivist camp. But I don't think when I say progressivist, I don't hear that in terms of a political progression. And you'll find both traditions within Christianity. Augustine, you find both in Augustine, quite frankly, because Nate is right. Augustine's all over the place. Idols are stock and stone. That's what Tom Holland likes to say. I've read so much of him. I've got, you know, forests of Saxony, dripping forests of Saxony in my mind. Idols are stock and stone. Idols are fronts for demons. Those are two answers. They're not the same answer. Is one answer right and one answer wrong? No. I think they both have validity. So then, what do you mean by demon? Oh. What is a spirit? Did the school you went to have a spirit? How do you think about that? Well, you can think Frank Peretti, and they're somewhere in the heavenlies or in the dungeons of hell, there's a spirit called Eastern Christian High School, circa 1970s. My high school definitely had a spirit. My high school had many spirits. Was my high school just stock and stone? Yeah. How can we put these thoughts together? Yeah. Cool drawing. Rick's got that up on there. How do you like my new work? It's inspired by your post-vacation video. I love it. You got a capital. You got a crab. What was it in that movie, that Will Smith movie, Kevin Kline, Will Smith, Selma Hayek movie about the West, where they operated this giant crab? I love it. That's fun. The pineapple.
Wiki Wow. Wiki Wild Wild West.
That's what a crazy group we have here. Andre. Hey, Paul, no actual question right now. Just you'd like to chat. Oh, yeah, I got to DM you. I know I haven't gotten back to all my Twitter DMs piled up while I was gone. So am I your internet pastor? Sure, you can call me that. I don't know if I'd be really curious to see how anybody takes that as an answer. So you're welcome to call me that, Andre. That's fine. Can you link the Substack with Holland and the Cuban? I'd be interested. Did anybody put that in the chat already? Rick, do you know? You can find it in my Twitter feed. I basically... Did someone get it?
Yep, I dropped it in there.
Okay, thanks. So it's in the... I never look at the live chat because I would be way too distracted to answer questions if I did that. And I think we need a crazy live chat that allows GIFs. Don't we? Don't we, Joey? Joey, what do you have against GIFs, huh? You're not going to let people have their fun? All right. Oh, there it is right there. Yeah, pull request. And to I don't know if, like I said, I don't know if I'll stick with my monthly subscription. He's got some other interesting articles I haven't read yet, but that interview with Tom Holland was good. That was good. All right, let's see. End of questions. Got to get them now. Oops. Oh, Joey's typing. I'm trying to get in before him. Denied. Joey keeps us from chaos here on the Bridges of Meaning Discord. I like it that way. All right. Have you ever read the short essay Grand by Jean-Pierre Paris? It's a satire of attempts to relegate Jesus to a fictional copy-paste of earlier myths. No, I haven't. That sounds interesting. Written a mere 10 years after Napoleon's death, he satirically makes the case that Napoleon Bonaparte never existed and was a myth based on the Greek god Apollo. So it's remarkably well written and so synchronous in life events. It really makes you see what Peugeot means when he says symbolism happens. I'm going to have to read that. Thank you, President of Forgetting, for not forgetting that, because that looks very much worthy of looking up. Hey, look at this. We have 6 minutes to spare. Woohoo! Any questions from the voice chat?
Well, if nobody's going to say anything, I wanted to introduce you to a new member of our community, Rabbi Joe. I found him on the Vervaeke server, and I am perfectly serious about this. I think he definitely knows a lot more about Judaism than I do, even though he's a heretic.
Welcome, Rabbi Joe. Well, I should talk to Rabbi Joe. That's awesome. We need, poor Jacob has had to, shoulder all the Jewish stuff here all by himself. Now at least he's got an ally, even if he's a heretic. So how is Rabbi Joe heretical? Is he what kind of rabbi is he?
Okay, so he's not actually a rabbi because he refuses to go take the test, which I'm sure he could pass in 5 seconds flat. But and that's a whole sickness in Orthodox Judaism. We can talk about it otherwise. So that's why I insist on calling him Rabbi Joe. But he belongs to a movement that's called Modern Orthodoxy, and they're very into academics and rationalism and tend to not believe in so much the supernatural stuff, which puts him on the other side of that divide you were talking about, I think, between you, me, and Christine Hayes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you know anything else about Christine Hayes? Because she's got a lot of other videos where she's talking to Jewish organizations. Where is she in the Jewish spectrum? Is she a observant Jew? Does she identify with the community?
I don't believe she's Jewish at all. I'm pretty sure she wasn't raised Jewish. I'm not aware that she converted in any. Certainly not Orthodox, because listening to some of the things she said, she sometimes says, that the Reform Jews are more true to the traditional Judaism than Orthodoxy is. So I'm guessing Orthodox isn't her flavor. But yeah, I mean, she seems to hang around in the Reform circles that I like to make fun of.
Well, cool. Maybe we should try and get her on the show. That'd be fun. I don't like going out and grabbing high status or celebrity people too much, but I make exceptions for people whose work I really like Tom Holland, and still haven't heard from Jordan Peterson. I don't know how he's doing. I don't know if anybody hears how he's doing lately. What the scuttlebutt is.
Have you listened to the Yale course on the New Testament?
No, I saw that because, of course, YouTube was feeding that up to me when I finished the old one. Have you listened to it? Is it any good?
I listened to it. I learned a lot. I don't know how you're going to feel. I think he inserted his theology into that course a lot more than Christina Hayes did.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'll tell you, the New Testament is a battleground. It's all a battleground, but yeah. Oh, it's interesting stuff.
Since you're talking about me, I just wanted to say I'm Joe, who's not a rabbi.
Oh, the only problem with Rick's thing here is I can't. What's your name in here? Joe Schmo?
It's Joe Schmo, yeah.
Joe Schmo. Well, welcome,
yeah,
Joe
and
Schmo.
I would, despite his characterization of me as a heretic, thought that was a somewhat fair description. I wouldn't say not supernatural, just less rooted through the Kabbalistic level.
We've got drama. I love it. Well, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
You should see the discussions we've been having on my server. It's been better than the forum discussions we have here.
Really? Wow. You'll enjoy there's in the middle of that poll report interview with Tom Holland. There's some really, I need to read it and think about it a lot more deeply. Tom Holland has some really interesting ideas about the relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it's fat because he basically says that the biggest no-show in Islam is Paul of Tarsus. And so I think in some ways he might argue that Islam is really sort of a third branch of Judaism. And in fact, he just did 2 podcasts on Afghanistan. The Afghans take their name from an apocryphal son of Saul, which is astounding, where the politics have gone between the Islamic world and the Jewish world since 1948. But it's interesting stuff. It's interesting stuff. So, well, we have arrived at noon, and I got through all the questions. I'm really proud of myself. We will not do this next week. I will maybe reach out to Paul Anleitner and see if he's feeling better, to see if he wants to come on and take this time slot next week. But it will not be me, but I should be back here the week after. And then we will do questions or... Oh, it's a baby.
I thought I'd introduce Sam to the Discord. He's happy.
Oh, welcome, Sam. Welcome.
Job, did you get him the rosary that he can bite? They have one of those.
A teething rosary.
Yeah, they're out there.
I believe it. I believe it. Well, thank you all. I know there's a whole bunch of messages for me on the Discord. I haven't gotten back to those yet. Coming back from vacation is like waking up in the morning and finding that 3 feet of snow have been fallen on your driveway and you have to shovel it. So it takes a little while for me to shovel out. But
Paul, I wanted to add real quick to your what you were saying that I agree with when it comes to what's happening with people who want to do it or who don't want to do when it comes to this very, very difficult situation in deciding with the vaccine. But there seems to be a providence connected to that seems to be like God is always working through us, like you said. And if we look close to our circles, we can see that He's helping us. And if we see the miracles that are happening, that God is providing us and guiding us, the things that are happening outside of our understanding, you leave that up to God, right? And just witness the miracles within you, like you said, with being a witness.
Yeah.
And I think there seems to be a lack of seeing God working through us every day, from the time we wake up and we take a deep breath and we join the Discord. Even this is a miracle that we're able to speak to you directly. So that's like a blessing.
Yeah.
You know, and I find that to be more powerful than all this other stuff that's happening outside. And I'm in New York. I work for the state, right? And they're going to do whatever they're going to do, which I will comply with. But ultimately, my body belongs to God.
Yeah. It's true.
And miracles are everywhere.
Yep, they are. They are. All right.
Yeah, just look at me. A miracle.
It's a nice note on which to end. So thank you all. And so I won't see you next week, but I will see you the week after. And I got a kind of a short week at work next week, so I don't know how present I'll be. But once school starts for my wife, then I'll be probably back to more old schedule routine. Summers are always a little bit odd. And once I get the homeless situation a little bit more under control around here at Livingstone's and get things sort of back in the groove, then I'll get back in some grooves. So, all right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention.